A warm welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the program. U.S. and Russia are to appoint teams to negotiate ending the war in Ukraine following high-level talks in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says President Vladimir Putin is prepared to speak to President Volodymyr Zelensky if necessary. And 2 detained Britons are charged with espionage in Iran. The World Today starts now. U.S. and Russian officials have concluded their talks in the Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh regarding ending the war in Ukraine. The U.S. State Department says both countries will now appoint teams to negotiate ending the war in Ukraine. After the 4-hour meeting, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov refused to answer questions from reporters regarding Ukraine. He was asked about his reaction to President Volodymyr Zelensky's repeated claims that he will not accept a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine without Ukraine's involvement. He also said that if he wants to, this is Sergei Lavrov saying that if Zelensky wants to participate in the negotiations, I will send people to take part. There were 3 major takeaways from the U.S.-Russia meeting in Riyadh. One is the appointment of ambassadors to each other's countries as soon as possible to lift obstacles to diplomatic missions, including restrictions on bank transfers to embassies. Second is to start the process on Ukrainian settlement. The U.S. is to appoint its representative and Russia will appoint theirs. It was also to create conditions for restarting cooperation in full and also expand various spheres. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was at the talks, was asked about sanctions on Russia. He says they're due to the conflict in Ukraine, but the concessions have to be made by all sides to bring an end to any conflict. The Ukrainian president has been commenting on the talks in Saudi Arabia, even though he's not been part of the discussions. A while ago, he spoke at a press conference in Turkey with the Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan after both had discussed global processes in great detail that could lead to the end of the war in Ukraine. He said it is important not to make any mistakes, while emphasizing again there can be no talks in ending the war in his country without Ukraine being at the meeting. It comes as a Russian President Vladimir Putin is said to have agreed to hold talks with him if necessary. Ukraine was not represented, as we said earlier, at the meeting in Saudi Arabia, and President Zelensky has repeatedly said Kyiv cannot recognize any agreements or things discussed about Ukraine. President Zelensky's spokesperson, Sergei Inkorov, has said he will not be meeting any officials either from Russia or from the U.S. during his visit to Saudi Arabia this week. Zelensky and his wife, Olena Zelenska, are expected in Saudi Arabia as part of a long-planned official visit before they head to the UAE and to Turkey. While he was in Turkey today, President Zelensky was seen alongside his wife, Olena, at a ceremony to honor the first president of Turkey in Ankara. He was wearing a black polo shirt and a coat to change from his usual combat green T-shirt, while other officials also joined in paying tribute to Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who served as president of Turkey from 1923 until his death in 1938. This was all happening while the bilateral meeting between the United States and Russia was underway in Saudi Arabia. Monitoring closely developments in Saudi Arabia is International Affairs Advisor and partner in the international consulting firm Gayfor Solutions, Stephen Hayes. Stephen joins us from Washington. It's also important to note that Stephen is also did spend some time in the USSR back in the 80s through to the 90s before it became Russia. Stephen, thanks for joining us today, and we'll be drawing from your insights into the issue in the region.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here again. It's an honor.
And what are you gleaning from these discussions that are taking place in Saudi Arabia? Just the U.S. and Russian officials meeting and facing each other at the meetings. I understand the first few minutes of the meeting, they both just stared at each other as they sat opposite each other at the table in Saudi Arabia. The officials only came in, the Saudi officials only came in just to start off, open the talks, and then they left the room and left, Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov to begin the talks and all of that. What are you gleaning from, what has been said and what has happened so far?
Well, it's not unusual, really, for people to stare at each other in such meetings. I've been in many such meetings. You're trying to be protocol-wise proper. You're waiting for the other person. You're trying to show strength at the same time, particularly between Russia and the United States. So at least it got started. And I think the important thing is that there is a dialogue going on. It should have been ongoing for a long time. I think that President Biden was wrong not to have more of a direct dialogue. I understand the different points of view, but I think it was positive in the sense that they were there together meeting. I think the meeting was really more for Russia-U.S. relations, frankly, than it was Ukraine. And I think in that regard, it's not improper to not include Ukraine on that point. It's an early meeting between two parties. The United States supports Ukraine with about 80% of its financial and weapon supply, so it's not also unusual that they would be one-on-one with Russia.
Yes, and it does seem that's the advantage that the Trump administration has on the Biden administration. The fact that Trump is seeking relations to be renewed with Russia. I think that was the main focus of this meeting. It does seem a lot of, attention to Russia in this regard, with Ukraine being, sidelined, it seems. Do you think it would have made a difference if Ukraine was invited to this initial stage of the talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think it would have made a very different meeting, and I think it would have been far more unproductive, frankly. I think that, again, the real reason, the primary reason, I should say, was to lay the groundwork for U.S.-Russia cooperation. And, of course, Ukraine is key to that. But it was too early. I think what was also interesting is that one of the key players on the Russian side was Mr. Dmitriev, who heads the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is a very major part of Soviet economy internationally. And that signaled, too, I think, there's a strong economic interest that Mr. Trump has, as well as the Russians. And so I think the economics was a major point of discussion, and certainly behind the scenes discussion as well.
Indeed. And just to highlight that the Russian president, after the meeting, according to the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that he has agreed to hold talks with the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, if necessary. What do you make of that comment and the way it came off from the foreign minister?
Well, I think it will be necessary. I think that it's clear that Putin would like to avoid it. He's always felt that Ukraine was part of Russia, and therefore to have the talks with Zelensky would indicate a parity between country to country, which Putin has tried to avoid and tried to basically absorb Ukraine. So I think it will be necessary to have them at the table. I don't think any agreement's possible without Ukraine's involvement in any extent.
But do you think it does give Russia more leverage over Ukraine in this war? First of all, is the fact that the U.S. president did speak to President Vladimir Putin just a week before this Saudi talks were to hold, and they agreed that we're going to meet in Saudi Arabia. He never had the sort of interactions with the Ukrainian president. And then after the meeting in Saudi Arabia, you have Russia saying, if necessary, it almost sounds like the U.S. giving Russia more leverage over Ukraine at this point. And I've heard, some analysts say, well, finally, discussions towards peace in Ukraine, Ukraine should accept whatever deal is being proposed and call it a day.
Well, I think that it does give Russia a lot of advantage on this. Trump has always gravitated to power figures. He likes power. He likes to be associated with power. And Ukraine, Zelensky to him is not as powerful as Putin, and that's a fact. So I think that Russia has a big advantage in this. What will be key really is whether the Europeans step up and support Ukraine. Europe is going to be left out of the talks as well unless they step up and give far more support to Ukraine. To do so then requires another calibration of Russia, NATO, and Russia-Europe relationships. And so that's going to be very complex. But so right now, I think the advantage is in Russia's hands. They control the agenda to some extent because Trump will align to some extent with Russia in terms of moving these talks forward. But he's really interested in a strong relationship with Russia, and he's going to get that. He's going to have to do something on Ukraine.
Right, and the takeaways from the meeting, both sides, that's Russia and the U.S., agreed to appoint ambassadors to each other's countries as soon as possible to begin the process on Ukraine settlements, to create conditions for restarting cooperation of full, and also expand various spheres of in various spheres. Beg your pardon. I'm not really sure I'm seeing anything that says Ukraine, in these agreements, or anything in favor of Ukraine.
Well, there's very little right now in favor of Ukraine, and we're going to have to wait and see what conditions are that the U.S. puts for concessions. Secretary Rubio has said there has to be concessions on both sides. It's hard to imagine what those concessions will be on the Russian side. It's very difficult for me to see what Russia will concede, since they've, as you rightly pointed out, they've already had considerable concessions out of Trump. What will be key is how threatened Europe feels and how much they're going to support Ukraine. If there is a strong support there, then there's going to have to be stronger, longer and stronger talks. We'll have to wait and see.
Stephen, you did spend a lot of time in the USSR when it still had, both Russia and Ukraine as just states within this regional bloc. How difficult is it or how difficult will it be for Ukraine to move away from Russia's shadow, stand on its own, and be recognized as a sovereign state?
It's going to be very difficult. Historically, they've been tied. There's a historic animosity also between the Ukrainians and the Russians that certainly go back to 1924, when a lot of the Ukraine population was killed by the Leninists and the communists at that time. And then Ukraine aligned in World War II with Germany because of that animosity towards Russia. So that has always been a long spur in Russia's side as well. So it's going to be difficult. Putin certainly doesn't want Ukraine as an independent country. Let us assume that it will remain independent, but it can't become a part of NATO. That has always been the line in the sand that Russia has said. And the reason for that is it's the underbelly of Russia. If Ukraine were part of NATO, they would be able to block Russia's access to the Black Sea, which is vital to their economy and military. And so Russia can't, from their point of view, can't allow that to happen. So to me, it's hard to imagine that Ukraine will become part of NATO. If it does, it's going to be several years ahead, I think, and also the future of NATO right now is at stake, given President Trump's view towards NATO. There's a new world alignment coming about, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and the Russian president has said he has no problems with Ukraine joining the European Union. But as for NATO, that's a no-go area. Thanks again, Steve, for joining us on the program.
Thank you. It's an honor as usual. Thank you very much.
To the United States now, a tweet, well, we're in the United States, a tweet from Wall Street Bulls at W_the Jazz on X today claims that USAID allocated $4 billion to the Bill Gates Foundation's Gavi with Elon Musk and Dogecoin, initiating an investigation into Gavi. The tweet also referenced Alex Jones for exposing related issues for a tweet on X today. The initial market reaction to this news was immediate, the Dogecoin experiencing a 5% surge in price from 10 cents to 105 cents to 1 cent, beg your pardon, within the first 30 minutes of the tweet's publication at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Technical indicators for Dogecoin on February 18, that's today, show a bullish trend following the tweet. The relative strength index for Dogecoin moved from 50 to 65 within the first hour, indicating increased buying pressure, according to CoinGecko. The moving average convergence-divergence line crossing above the signal line at 10:45 a.m. Eastern, further confirming the bullish sentiment. The trading volume, as previously mentioned, increased by 20% to 1.8 billion Doge, reinforcing the strength of the bullish trend, according to CoinGecko. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump last Monday signed an executive order directing the Justice Department to pause prosecutions of Americans accused of bribing foreign government officials while trying to win or retain business in their countries. Trump's order pauses enforcement of the nearly half-century-old Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA for short, and directs Attorney General Pam Bondi to review current and past actions related to the law and prepare new guidelines for enforcement. The law, enacted in 1977, prohibits companies that operate in the United States from bribing foreign officials. Over time, it's become a guiding force for how American businesses operate overseas. Trump wanted to strike down FCPA during his first term in office. He's called it a horrible law and says the world is laughing at us for enforcing it. Trump's words. Anti-corruption watchdog Transparency International said FCPA made the United States a leader in addressing global corruption. Let's make sense of this now. I want to bring in leading global expert in law and compliance risk management, Chinwe Esimai. She joins us from New York. Chinwe, it's great to have you on the program today.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I'm hoping that you can help us understand what the FCPA is. Just set the scene for us, those of us who are watching this part of the world, what the FCPA is and, what it means for American businesses.
Yes, and as you laid out, the FCPA has been an important tool for the U.S. in terms of anti-bribery enforcement. So it prohibits the offering of anything of value in exchange for business in order to induce someone to act improperly in relation to their obligations or their roles. The FCPA is something that applies to U.S. persons, but also U.S. companies. And so companies and the jurisdictional arm of the FCPA is pretty large, and so it has extraterritorial impact. And so to your point, the FCPA has been very actively enforced for a number of decades now, and it has really elevated the standard of doing business around the world. So not just for U.S. companies, but also for the jurisdictions where U.S. companies do business. And so it's been a pretty important statute, and it's been quite rigorously enforced for the last several decades.
So what does Trump's executive order really say regarding this?
Yes, and I think first it was great that you were accurate in your summary of the order. One of the things that we've noted in some of the reporting is that there's been a lot of inaccuracy. So some folks have said, well, the president has decided not to enforce the FCPA, which is not accurate. And so what he has said in the executive order is that he directed the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to issue guidance on the FCPA. As you noted, he also indicated that the FCPA has disadvantaged American companies in its in enforcement. And so he's advised Attorney General to issue guidance within 180 days, which is approximately 6 months. She also has the ability to extend that time frame for the issuance of the guidance. In addition, he's asked her to take a look at the existing caseload of FCPA matters and evaluate and make sure that they're not being enforced in a way that disadvantages American businesses. He's also asked her to look at prior cases and see if there's anything that needs to be remediated. And we've seen the Attorney General and this administration take a look at the existing cases in order to assess whether remedial action is needed. And then the last piece of it is, after the guidance is issued, he's noted in the executive order that any enforcement should align with the guidance that has been issued. Now, what I will note about that is it's not unusual at all for a Department of Justice, an Attorney General, to issue guidance on existing statutes. And a lot of times what the guidance does is it clarifies the existing statute, or it advises or it provides guidance to folks as to how the administration or the department intends to enforce that specific statute. So it's not at all unusual for an Attorney General to issue guidance. I will actually say that this framework of making the Attorney General perform her role in analyzing it is a way of deferring to an expert, i.e. the attorney, without the president himself actually making the final conclusions on what will happen.
So with Trump's executive order, does that probably suppose that foreign partners have been taking advantage of American businesses in some kind of way?
So I think that's one of the statements that the president has made, which is, and you can see this, it's consistent with some of his other conversations with countries like Mexico or Canada, is looking at tariffs and looking at how are things working in practice, and is there a sense that the U.S. is being disadvantaged. I do think that in the guidance that in the document, the fact sheet that accompanied the executive order, the president did make reference to national security. And so the idea being that if American businesses are being disadvantaged, there may be a national security implication. I think if you look strictly speaking at the anti-bribery provisions, I believe that part of what the president is referencing is the fact that in certain jurisdictions, there's a culture of either paying bribes or a culture of giving gifts. So whether it relates to the fact that the U.S. does rigorously enforce its anti-bribery laws, because there are countries that have anti-bribery laws that are not really enforced. And so one piece is the level of enforcement, and then the other piece is obviously some of the restrictions around giving lavish gifts. So I think the opinion that the president is expressing is that the American businesses' inability to align with the cultures of the markets where they do business is a disadvantage. But I do think that overall, by and large, the FCPA has operated as a powerful tool to elevate the ethical practices around the world. And I also do not believe the Attorney General will eliminate enforcement altogether. I think what we'll likely see is a shift in focus. We'll likely see a shift in focus where there's a little bit more attention paid to the aspects of anti-bribery that overlap with anti-money laundering. So instances where, for example, we're observing narco trafficking, human trafficking, and some of the other counterterrorism activities where there's more of an overlap. Because we've already seen with the Attorney General's actions that there's more focus on those types of activities and crimes.
It sounds kind of ambitious. I don't know. Monitoring the thousands of American businesses out there that have doing business with other foreign partners. Would that also include American businesses that have representatives or representation, beg your pardon, in various countries, say for Nigeria? Will their activities also come under the FCPA?
Absolutely, they did. So when I ran the anti-bribery program at Citigroup, we have an office in Nigeria, and the global anti-bribery policy applied to all of our markets. So regardless of what country where we did business, those countries were subject to the FCPA, because as a U.S. company, our company was subject to the FCPA. And so the activities of our employees, regardless of where they worked, was subject to the FCPA.
And that is pretty interesting. So what happens within this 180 days? Who's keeping the companies accountable?
So my advice to companies will be to continue to have rigorous anti-bribery compliance controls and frameworks, because it's unlikely that the statute will go away. I think the Attorney General will issue guidance, but it's important to continue to put in place reasonably designed controls to ensure that the company is not on the wrong side of anti-bribery regulations. I will also just advise people to wait and see and not jump to conclusions as to the outcomes of the guidance from the Attorney General, such as especially the conclusions that the FCPA will not be enforced at all, because I think it will not be an affirmative defense if a company were to say, well, there was guidance that was being issued and we thought the statute was going away.
Chinwe, thank you so much for speaking with us. Chinwe is a global expert in law and compliance risk management. Is also president and CEO of Sector 3 Global Advisors. Thank you again for your invaluable time on the program.
Thank you for having me.
No deaths have been reported after a plane landing in Toronto from the U.S. skidded along the runway, flipped over with flames visible just for a brief time. It's not clear what caused the incident. Analysts suggesting the weather may have played a role or that the aircraft struck something. The incident took place shortly after 2 p.m. local time on Monday. It involved a model CRJ 900 plane operating as Delta Airlines flight DL4819. The aircraft arrived at Toronto from the U.S. city of Minneapolis and was carrying 76 passengers and 4 crew members. As it landed, the plane appears to have struck the runway, slid for some distance, and then flipped over, according to journalist and pilot Dan Roden. All 80 people on board survived. There were only 18 injuries, of which only a small number are thought to be serious. Delta has promised to give more updates as investigations get underway into the incident. An anti-fascist rally has held outside the Gare de l'Est railway station in Paris, France, to protest a reported attack by ultra-radicals against members of Kurdish youth organization a day earlier. There was heavy police presence, with the officers observing order during the rally, as well as protesters marching with flags and chanting. According to local media, screening of the film Z of Costa Gavras, organized by Kurdish youth organization Young Struggle and the Cultural Association of Turkish Migrant Workers, was taking place in the French capital's 10th arrondissement on Sunday and was interrupted by an attack by 36 black masked men who were carrying sticks and knives. One of the victims was reportedly stabbed and taken to hospital. His condition was initially critical, but later stabilized. He has been discharged from hospital. The attack caused widespread outrage, with anti-fascist protests planned in Paris, targeting associations condemning the worrying rise in violent actions by ultra-nationalists. A couple in northeast Pakistan has been detained on suspicion of murdering a 13-year-old girl who worked for them as a maid for allegedly stealing chocolates. A girl who goes only by one name, Ikra, succumbed to multiple injuries in hospital last Wednesday. A preliminary police investigation said she had been tortured. The case in Rawalpindi has sparked widespread outrage and posts with the hashtag Justice for Ikra, having garnered tens of thousands of views and reignited a debate over child labor and the mistreatment of domestic workers. Laws pertaining to child labor can vary across the country, but children under the age of 15 cannot be employed as domestic workers in the province of Punjab. The Taliban in Afghanistan is in Japan on what is the first visit by the group that rules Afghanistan. The delegation, consisting of foreign affairs, education, economy and health officials, arrived on Sunday for a week-long visit to Asahi Shimbun newspaper. The local paper, reported this meeting. The visit is a rarity, however, for the Taliban, whose diplomatic trips have previously remained close to Afghanistan since regaining power in 2021. The Taliban representatives are expected to seek humanitarian support and potentially discuss diplomatic ties with Japanese officials. However, Afghanistan's economy is set to take a huge hit right now with the dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development, a soft power of the United States, better known to us as USAID. Analysts think dismantling the agency will be disastrous for many poor countries where it helps provide humanitarian health and educational services. The United Nations says more than half of Afghanistan's estimated 40 million population is dependent on international handouts for their survival. Many of the remaining barely earn enough to exist. U.S. aid has played a critical part in alleviating the suffering of Afghans since the hasty retreat of U.S. and its allies from the country and the return of the Taliban to power in mid-2021. Well, since then, the United States has been the largest donor of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, amounting to $3.71 billion, channeled through UN agencies and other international organizations. U.S. aid has been responsible for delivering a large part of the proportion of the aid. I want to bring in now Afghan journalist Hades Pardes, who joins us from Islamabad. Hades, thank you for Hadiz, beg your pardon. Hadiz, thank you for joining us on the program today. We appreciate your time and the risk also that you're taking to speak to us. Let's begin, with the reports that you've been receiving from Afghanistan since you left, I believe, about 3 years ago after the Taliban took over.
Thank you very much, Amarachi, for having me. Do you have my voice?
We can hear you, Hadiz. We can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Amarachi, for having me. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Hadiz. We can hear you.
Thank you very much, Amarachi, for having me. Yes, you talked about leaving Afghanistan and everything behind. Yes, in Afghanistan, a lot of Afghans, they have left the country and everything behind, and they seek refuge in the neighboring countries, Pakistan. And because they were under security threats, and they left everything behind and now seek refuge in Pakistan. But unfortunately, as you also described it, the situation here in Pakistan evolves, and after the executive orders from the U.S. president, a lot of Afghan case holders they were waiting to process their case and go to the U.S. and other Western countries. But after specifically the U.S. pausing the U.S. admission programs, so they have been living in uncertain situation, and at the same time, overall, the crackdown from the Pakistani police, and as well as they have been kind of the Pakistani authorities, they were pushing pressure or getting deported, some of them to Afghanistan back. So overall, the current situation for the Afghan refugees here in Pakistan is very tense, and they're under pressure, and overall the situation is not good for them, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for laying the scene for us, Hadiz. Are you saying, well, because our understanding is that, these Afghans are refugees in Pakistan. Um, is there some agreement between the Pakistani government and the Taliban in Afghanistan to return refugees?
Amarachi, look, it is quite uh, uh, the I mean, after the start of the new year 2025, the Pakistani government, specifically operation against the Afghan refugees migration, and they keep saying that we will not allow those who don't have the legal documentation. But according to us, I'm keep in touch with the Afghan. So some of the Afghans who they have legal documents and all these visa and other, still they have been deported to Afghanistan. And here in the general perception, I mean, when I'm talking with the Afghans, so this is kind of pressuring on the Talibani government as well, and on Afghan as well, and at the same time to kind of putting pressure on specifically on the Western countries and specifically on US, because now, according to the reports, more than 20,000 Afghan case holders they have been living here since the unprecedented change in Afghanistan. Apparently, there is no kind of deal between the Taliban de facto government and Pakistan, but yes, every day they are deporting Afghans from Pakistan to Afghanistan, and unfortunately, some of the Afghans they have even the legal documents for residing here in Pakistan, but still we have reports, and even I know some of them that they have deported back to Afghanistan.
So this situation did evolve because the U.S. and its allies began withdrawing forces from Afghanistan on August 30, 2021, and that's when there was a lot of chaos as a result of that. Do you somehow blame the U.S. for the present condition of Afghans who cannot return to their homeland, and for those who are in their homeland and are suffering under the Taliban?
Amarachi, you pointed out that unfortunately, after the chaotic withdrawal of the U.S. from Afghanistan and the collapse of the
Hadith?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. The connection is rather shaky. But you're fine. We can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. As you rightly pointed out, overall, unfortunately, after the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. from Afghanistan back in 2021, the start of all the hardships start from this point. According to the reports, more than 500,000 people they just migrated to Pakistan after the withdrawal of U.S. forces and collapse of the previous regime in Afghanistan. And also at the same time, the Afghans, they migrate into other countries, other neighboring countries, and even some of around 180 up to 80,000, according to the reports, they have been evacuated to the U.S. Look, overall, the situation after the chaotic withdrawal of U.S., the situation for the Afghans, as you are and as the viewers, they might be know the situation in Afghanistan is getting worse and day by day. And just according to the UN, the reports continuously, the economic hardship for the Afghans, and as well as it is almost 4 years that the Taliban de facto authorities, the government is ruling in Afghanistan, but nobody is recognizing them. And in the neighboring countries, the Afghans, they face with a lot of problems. Even if I summarize it, the problem is overall, and now even the Afghans, they don't know to which address they can approach for solving the problem. Because here in Pakistan, so
Right.
Yeah.
Hadith, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to explain to us the dire situation in Afghanistan and the situation with the refugees in Pakistan. To other stories now, more than 30 people have died in a bus crash on a mountainous road in Bolivia. The vehicle plunged nearly 800 meters in the southwestern district of Yocala, with police suspecting the driver lost control. 14 others sustained injuries, including 4 children. According to a hospital official, several of the injured remained in serious conditions. According to local reports, the accident occurred on the road between Potosi and Oruro, an area known for its treacherous terrain. Police Colonel Victor Benavid told news media that the speeding may have been a major factor in this accident, saying the driver was unable to control the bus. The Vatican says Pope Francis is being treated for a complex clinical situation and will remain in hospital for as long as necessary. The 88-year-old was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Friday to undergo treatment and tests for bronchitis. On Monday, the Vatican said the pontiff has a polymicrobial infection of his respiratory tract, which has required a change in his treatment. A later date added that the Pope was proceeding with the prescribed treatment in a stable condition and did not have a fever. He also undertook some work and reading while in hospital on Monday. Here in Nigeria, leader of the Pan-Niger Delta group Pan-Niger Delta Forum, in Nigeria, PANDA for short, Edwin Clark, has died. He was aged 97. A statement signed by Professor C.C. Clark on behalf of the family says Chief Clark died on Monday, February 17th. A former federal commissioner for information, was a prominent figure in Nigerian politics, an advocate for the rights of the Niger Delta, a lawyer, administrator, nationalist, and freedom fighter. He served as Commissioner for Education in the Midwestern region from 1968 to 1971, and later as Commissioner for Finance and Establishment in the defunct Bendel State between 1972 and 1975. At the federal level, he was appointed Commissioner for Information in 1975 and subsequently became a senator from 1979 until 1983. He was also the leader of the South-South People's Assembly and the Southern and Middle Belt Leaders Forum. Chief Clark's death comes 4 days after another elder statesman, Pa Ayo Adebanjo, passed away. The WTO General Council has approved the appointment of Ambassador Adamu Muhammad Abdulhamid of Nigeria as the chairperson of the Committee of Trade in Services Special Session with effect from February of 2025. Prior to this appointment, Ambassador Abdulhamid held various positions in the WTO, such as the chairperson of a Trade Facilitation Committee, Council for Trade in Goods, Trade Policy Review Body, in addition to his key national position as the ambassador of Nigeria to the WTO. The present administration of Nigeria in general and the Ministry of Trade, Industry, Trade and Investment under the Minister, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, has commended the appointment. Back out beyond our shores, Iran's judiciary has charged a British couple, Craig and Lindsay Foreman, with espionage. Mr. and Mrs. Foreman were arrested in January, but news of their detention on unspecified security charges emerged last week. Judiciary spokesman Asghar Jahangir said the couple, both aged 52, had entered Iran under the guise of tourists and gathered information in multiple provinces of the country. Announcing the charges, Mr. Jahangir said the couple had been under surveillance by provincial intelligence agencies and was subsequently arrested as part of a coordinated intelligence operation. The pair moved from East Sussex to start a new life in Andalusia, Spain in 2019 and appeared on an episode of Channel 4's A New Life in the Sun in 2022 to showcase their lives as experts. The couple had been on a motorbike trip around the world and had planned to stay in Iran for 5 days before they were charged with espionage or spying by Iranian authorities. The British Foreign Office's official advice is against all travel to Iran, saying British and British-Iranian dual nationals are at risk of arrest, questioning or detention. It adds that having a British passport or connections to the UK can be reason enough for the Iranian authorities to detain them. Pre-carnival celebrations in Rio de Janeiro are in full swing despite a record-breaking heat wave. Currently in the country, temperatures soaring above 5 degrees Celsius, that's above average, and a wind chill exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. Hundreds of participants, however, have made their way to the celebrations dressed in swimsuits or they're shirtless. They're dancing and parading through the streets, undeterred by the scorching conditions. Participants say they're not afraid of the heat because they are hotter than the sun. Others say they feel like a frog in a frying pan and are slowly dying in Brazil. Authorities have issued health alerts, however, concerning the extreme heat, which is fueled by climate change, and the heat waves. They say poses significant risks, but despite the warnings, the festive spirit remains unshaken as Cariocas embrace their favorite time of the year. Sure, we'll have pictures of this sometime later. But as we end the program, the 12th Philippine International Pyromusical Competition in Pasay has dazzled crowds as teams from the Philippines and Austria lit up the night sky with a stunning pyromusical performance celebrating creativity and innovation. Aerial and ground views of the fireworks display with vibrant bursts of lighting up the sky as spectators watch in awe has been, well, a sight to behold across the country. Crowds have been seen embracing the moment, filming the spectacle, cheering on the dazzling show as it unfolded. The competition is set to draw thousands of visitors from Saturday through to March 15th. It features 9 countries. It also boosts local businesses. This year, however, eco-friendly fireworks are being used. Augmented reality features are also featuring, as well as enhancing the experience of visitors and spectators as the pyromusical competition merges art, technology, and tourism. We do apologize for the lack of sound in that report, but thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubari.